Empowerment Without Ritual, Transmission in Unborn Mind Zen. Series Introduction. In recent days, a thoughtful question was posed by one of our Unborn Mind Zen community members, Scott, which touches the very heart of transmission, realization, and spiritual authority. His inquiry was not academic. It arose from lived experience, sincere practice, and direct encounters with the living mystery of mind itself. Scott wrote, "In Vajrayāna, one is generally required to receive empowerments from a guru or lama before being able to practice many tantric rites. I have had a few empowerments as above, but have also been empowered a couple times directly by deities in dreams and visions, as well as by self-empowerment. My question is this: in the Unborn Mind School of Zen, how is this topic generally approached?" This question opens a door that many practitioners quietly stand before but rarely step through. It raises a fundamental inquiry. What is empowerment really? Is it something bestowed by ceremony? Granted by lineage? Confirmed by outer authority? Or is it something far more intimate, something that occurs when the unborn itself is directly recognized? The Great Divide: ritual transmission versus direct recognition. Across Buddhist traditions, particularly within Vajrayāna, empowerment, abhisheka, functions as formal authorization. It grants permission to engage in specific practices, establishes ritual connection to lineage, and sanctifies the practitioner's participation in tantric method. Yet from the earliest Chan transmission, beginning with Bodhi-Dharma's arrival in China, a radically different orientation emerged. Direct pointing to the mind, seeing one's nature, becoming Buddha. No ritual initiation, no ceremonial empowerment, no outer confirmation required. Instead, realization itself became the transmission. Unborn Mind Zen stands firmly within this current, not in rejection of Vajrayāna, Dzogchen, or esoteric traditions, but by pointing to their original source, the primordial recognition of the unborn mind. Empowerment reframed. Within the unborn mind framework, empowerment is not something added. It is not bestowed from outside. It is not constructed through symbolic rites. Rather, empowerment is the moment the unborn recognizes itself. When this occurs, there is no receiver, no giver, no ritual intermediary, no hierarchy of attainment, only the direct unveiling of what has never been absent. This is the great empowerment. Why this series matters now. In our modern spiritual landscape, practitioners often move fluidly between Zen, Dzogchen, Vajrayāna, Advaita, contemplative Christianity, and non-dual traditions. Many carry experiences of empowerment ceremonial, visionary, dream-based, intuitive, or spontaneous without clear guidance on how to understand them. Some cling to ritual authority. Others dismiss all structure. Many remain uncertain where true transmission actually occurs. This series is offered to bring clarity, stability, and direct orientation back to the unborn itself. What this series will explore. Over the coming installments, we will examine what empowerment truly means beyond ceremony, how Unborn Mind Zen understands transmission, the difference between visionary experience and stabilized realization, the 4 Vajrayāna empowerments reinterpreted through unborn mind recognition, the role of dreams, deities, and symbolic encounters, the meaning and misunderstanding of self-empowerment, what living empowerment looks like in daily life, not as abstract theory, but as direct experiential orientation, a living transmission. This series is not being written as doctrine. It is being offered as a living, pointing one that invites the reader to turn awareness back toward its own unborn source. For when the unborn is recognized, no ceremony is required. No permission is needed. No outer seal is necessary. The seal is already present. With gratitude to Scott for opening this inquiry, and to our Unborn Mind community for walking this path together, we now begin Empowerment Without Ritual, Transmission in Unborn Mind Zen. May this series serve not belief but recognition. Svasti. Chapter 1. What empowerment really means. Before empowerment can be understood, it must first be freed from its most persistent misunderstanding. In most contemporary spiritual discourse, empowerment is treated as something that is received, granted, or conferred through ceremonial transmission. It is imagined as a spiritual authorization bestowed upon an individual who is deemed ready to advance along a prescribed path. This view, while widespread, quietly assumes that awakening is an acquisition and that realization depends upon an external mechanism of bestowal. Unborn Mind Zen begins by dismantling this assumption at its root. If empowerment is something that must be added, then the practitioner is implicitly incomplete. If empowerment must be granted, then realization is postponed into the future. If empowerment requires permission, then awakening becomes subordinate to institutional authority. Each of these assumptions subtly displaces attention away from direct recognition and redirects it towards spiritual accumulation. The unborn does not operate this way. When inquiry turns inward with sufficient clarity, it becomes evident that awareness itself is already complete. Nothing essential is missing. Nothing fundamental is absent. What obscures realization is not a lack of empowerment, but the persistence of conceptual identity, habitual seeking, and the mistaken belief that truth exists elsewhere. From this perspective, empowerment is not something that is added to awareness. It is something that is uncovered by removing what never belonged there in the first place. This distinction is critical. Empowerment understood as addition reinforces the idea of spiritual progress as accumulation. More practices, more initiations, more authorizations, more credentials. Empowerment understood as revelation works in the opposite direction. It dissolves false structures rather than building new ones. It strips away the scaffolding of identity until what remains is naked awareness itself, unborn, luminous, and self-sustaining. This is why the early Chan tradition rejected ritual empowerment structures altogether. When Bodhi-Dharma entered China, he did not introduce ceremonial initiations or tantric authorizations. He introduced direct pointing. He carried no outer empowerments because he was pointing to the empowerment that precedes all ritual, the recognition of mind's unborn nature. In this light, the unborn itself is the primordial empowerment. It does not arrive through ceremony. It is not transmitted across time. It is not dependent on lineage succession. It is present wherever awareness is present. The moment the mind recognizes its own ground, empowerment has already occurred. There is no temporal gap between recognition and authorization. They are the same event. This is why ritual, however elaborate or symbolically rich, can never produce awakening. Ritual can orient attention. It can stabilize meaning. It can create powerful psychological and symbolic frameworks. But it cannot generate realization, because realization is not an object to be produced. The unborn is not something that arises as a result of causes and conditions. It is the very ground from which causes and conditions emerge. Attempting to empower awareness through ritual is like attempting to illuminate the sun with a candle. The candle may be beautiful. It may have emotional resonance. It may inspire reverence. But the light it points toward was never dependent on its flame. Another subtle danger embedded within empowerment culture is the outsourcing of authority. When practitioners believe that awakening requires permission from external sources, they unconsciously delay recognition. Seeking replaces seeing. Dependence replaces direct engagement. Spiritual hierarchy begins to substitute for experiential clarity. Unborn Mind Zen restores authority to awareness itself. This does not mean teachers are unnecessary. It means their function is transformed. A genuine teacher does not grant empowerment. They do not confer realization. They remove confusion. They clarify orientation. They confirm recognition when it arises naturally. Their role is not to transmit power, but to dissolve obstruction. This shift is profound. It marks the transition from institutional spirituality to experiential sovereignty. Another common misunderstanding equates empowerment with extraordinary experience. Practitioners often associate empowerment with visions, bliss states, energetic surges, symbolic encounters, dream transmissions, or numinous phenomena. While such experiences may arise spontaneously in contemplative practice, they are not empowerment. They are expressions of mind display. They are movements within awareness, not awareness itself. True empowerment is not measured by intensity. It is measured by stability. It expresses itself through unshakable clarity, non-reactivity, freedom from fixation, natural compassion, and effortless presence. When recognition stabilizes, empowerment ceases to be an event and becomes a mode of being. Here, Unborn Mind Zen introduces its most radical reversal. One does not become empowered in order to awaken. One awakens and discovers that empowerment was never missing. The entire spiritual economy flips inward. Instead of climbing toward authorization, authorization collapses into recognition. Instead of earning transmission, transmission reveals itself as inherent. Instead of becoming something new, the practitioner ceases pretending to be something limited. This reversal dissolves spiritual striving at its root. There is no ladder to climb. There is no credential to acquire. There is no gatekeeper standing at the threshold. The gate opens inward, not outward. It opens when the illusion of separation dissolves and the unborn stands revealed as the true nature of mind. This chapter establishes the foundation upon which the entire series rests. Everything that follows discussions of lineage, visionary experience, Vajrayāna empowerment structures, self-empowerment claims, and living transmission depends upon this central recognition. Empowerment is not conferred. It is uncovered. When the unborn is seen, the great empowerment has already occurred. Chapter 2, Lineage without formal transmission. How the unborn is passed without ceremony. When empowerment is understood as recognition rather than ritual, the entire notion of lineage is transformed. In institutional traditions, lineage is often preserved through formal initiations, certificates, hierarchical successions, and documented authorization. Transmission becomes something that moves along a visible chain of authority passed from teacher to student through structured rites. Unborn Mind Zen does not deny lineage. It dissolves its outer scaffolding and reveals its inner continuity. Here, lineage is not preserved by ceremony. It is preserved by recognition. The unborn does not travel from one person to another. It does not migrate across generations. It does not depend upon historical succession. It is present wherever awareness is present. What is transmitted is not substance, power, or authority. What is transmitted is clarity, the recognition of what has always been so. This is why early Chan tradition spoke of mind-to-mind transmission rather than ritual inheritance. When Bodhidharma spoke of direct pointing, he was not describing a technique. He was describing a radical immediacy. The teacher does not give something to the student. The teacher points the student back to what the student already is. This distinction is subtle but decisive. In ritual lineages, continuity is maintained through form. In Unborn Mind Zen, continuity is maintained through awakening itself. The lineage is not a chain of names. It is a living current of recognition that renews itself each time the unborn is directly seen. Because of this, Unborn Mind Zen lineage is not exclusive. It is not bound by institutional borders. It does not require affiliation, robes, vows, or ceremonial status. Wherever the unborn is recognized, the lineage is already present. Wherever recognition stabilizes, the transmission has occurred. This does not mean that history is irrelevant. The great teachers of the past did not vanish into abstraction. Their words, gestures, and living examples serve as mirrors that reflect the same recognition forward through time. But their authority does not rest in their titles, it rests in their realization. They are not revered because they occupied positions. They are revered because they dissolved into the unborn. This creates a lineage that is simultaneously ancient and immediate. It is ancient because the unborn has no beginning. It is immediate because recognition occurs only now. One of the great misunderstandings about non-ritual transmission is the assumption that it lacks structure. In reality, it possesses a far more demanding structure, direct responsibility. Without ceremonial validation, the practitioner cannot rely on external confirmation. There is no ritual seal to hide behind. There is no symbolic badge of attainment. There is only lived clarity or lived confusion. This makes Unborn Mind Zen transmission uncompromising. It does not permit imitation. It does not tolerate performance spirituality. It does not reward symbolic compliance. Either recognition has occurred or it has not. Either the unborn is stabilized or it remains obscured. Because of this, teachers within this lineage function less as authorities and more as diagnostic mirrors. Their task is not to grant permission, but to observe whether recognition has genuinely stabilized. They test clarity not through ritual but through conduct, responsiveness, freedom from fixation, and the natural emergence of compassion and wisdom. The real confirmation is not verbal, it is existential. Another important distinction arises here. In formal transmission systems, lineage is often treated as possession. One has lineage, one belongs to lineage. One inherits lineage. In Unborn Mind Zen, lineage is not possessed. It is embodied. It does not belong to anyone. It expresses itself through those who have dissolved into it. This eliminates spiritual ownership. No one owns the unborn. No one controls transmission. No one monopolizes awakening. The lineage is not a property. It is a living presence. This is why Unborn Mind Zen can integrate insights from Zen, Dzogchen, Vajrayāna, and contemplative traditions without fragmenting its core. The common root is recognition itself. Forms may differ. Language may vary. Cultural expressions may shift. But the unborn remains identical in all genuine realization traditions. This also explains why ritual empowerment, when approached without recognition, often produces dependency. The practitioner becomes attached to lineage structures rather than liberated by them. The form replaces the function. The ceremony becomes the destination. The symbol eclipses the reality it was meant to point toward. Unborn Mind Zen restores function over form. It places recognition above ritual, realization above hierarchy, clarity above institutional continuity. Yet, this does not produce chaos. On the contrary, it produces a lineage that cannot decay because it does not depend on fragile outer structures. Institutions rise and fall, traditions fracture. Organizations dissolve. The unborn remains. This is the hidden strength of lineage without ceremony. It is not transmitted through documents. It is transmitted through direct seeing. It does not require preservation. It renews itself spontaneously whenever awareness turns inward and recognizes its own unborn source. This is why Unborn Mind Zen speaks not of preserving lineage, but of living transmission. Each moment of recognition reactivates the lineage anew. Each awakening refreshes the current. Each practitioner who stabilizes realization becomes a silent carrier of the unborn without needing titles or authorization. Transmission, then, is not a historical event. It is an ever-present possibility. It is not something that happened long ago. It is something that happens now. Chapter 3, The Four Empowerments Revisited. Vajrayāna transmission through the lens of the unborn. Within Vajrayāna Buddhism, empowerment is traditionally articulated through a fourfold structure. These empowerments are presented not merely as ritual formalities, but as progressive gateways into deeper layers of realization. For many practitioners, however, this structure becomes frozen into ceremony. The symbolic gestures remain, while the inner meaning grows increasingly obscure. Unborn Mind Zen does not dismiss this fourfold structure. Instead, it inverts the direction of interpretation. Rather than treating empowerment as something imposed from the outside, it reveals these stages as descriptions of what naturally unfolds when the unborn is recognized and stabilized. When seen in this light, the four empowerments cease to be ritual milestones and become maps of experiential transformation. The first empowerment, often called the vase empowerment, is traditionally associated with purification of body and the introduction to sacred form. In ritual contexts, it involves water, crowns, mandalas, and symbolic gestures. Yet its deeper meaning points not to ceremonial purification, but to a far more radical realization, the recognition that embodiment itself is not separate from awareness. From the standpoint of the unborn, the body is not an obstacle, it is an expression. When recognition stabilizes, the practitioner no longer experiences the body as a solid self-object. Sensation, movement, breath, and perception are revealed as luminous activity arising within awareness rather than belonging to a separate entity. This is the true meaning of bodily empowerment. It is not ritual cleansing. It is the collapse of identification with form. The second empowerment, often termed the secret empowerment, is traditionally associated with subtle energies, channels, and internal yogic processes. It is frequently linked to tantric methods involving breath, visualization, and inner heat. While these techniques can produce powerful energetic experiences, their ultimate function is not stimulation but recognition. From the unborn perspective, this empowerment corresponds to the discovery that awareness is not inert. It is dynamically luminous. When fixation dissolves, the practitioner naturally perceives the living vibrancy of mind itself. Energy is no longer experienced as personal power. It is recognized as spontaneous display. The so-called secret empowerment is not the activation of esoteric forces, it is the unveiling of intrinsic luminosity. The third empowerment, known as the wisdom empowerment, is traditionally associated with the direct realization of emptiness and non-duality. Here Vajrayāna and Unborn Mind Zen converge most explicitly. This stage corresponds to the collapse of subject-object separation. Awareness no longer perceives itself as standing apart from phenomena. The observer dissolves into the observed. Experience is recognized as a seamless field without center or boundary. Yet Unborn Mind Zen goes further by refusing to reify emptiness into a philosophical abstraction. Emptiness is not a concept. It is the direct recognition that all appearances arise without inherent substance while remaining vividly present. When this recognition stabilizes, wisdom ceases to be intellectual understanding and becomes lived perception. The fourth empowerment, often called the word empowerment or suchness empowerment, is considered the highest initiation within Vajrayāna systems. It points beyond method, symbol, and conceptual framework toward the direct recognition of ultimate reality itself. In Unborn Mind Zen, this empowerment is simply called awakening. It is the moment when awareness recognizes its own unborn nature. No ritual language is required. No symbolic seal is necessary. There is no final certificate. There is only the silent certainty of direct seeing. Here, the practitioner no longer seeks transformation. The one who sought dissolves. The unborn stands revealed as the ground of all experience. When viewed together, the four empowerments do not describe a ritual ladder. They describe the natural deepening of recognition. First, identification with form dissolves. Then the luminous vitality of awareness reveals itself. Next, non-dual clarity stabilizes. Finally, the unborn is recognized as the ever-present ground beyond all stages. This reinterpretation resolves a long-standing confusion among practitioners who feel torn between Zen immediacy and Vajrayāna structure. The apparent contradiction disappears when empowerment is understood as description rather than prescription. Vajrayāna did not invent these stages. It symbolically encoded them. Unborn Mind Zen simply removes the symbolic scaffolding and points directly to the lived reality beneath it. Historically, many great masters emphasized this same principle, even within tantric contexts. Padmasambhava repeatedly warned against mistaking ritual performance for realization. He emphasized direct recognition of awareness as the ultimate transmission. While outer forms remained culturally important, the inner orientation was always toward the unborn ground of mind. This is why Unborn Mind Zen can integrate Vajrayāna language without becoming dependent on Vajrayāna ritual. It honors the depth of tantric symbolism while refusing to substitute symbolism for realization. The empowerments are not something to be acquired. They unfold naturally when awareness recognizes itself. Another important consequence follows from this understanding. When empowerment is interpreted as recognition, it ceases to be exclusive. There is no requirement for special permission to awaken. There is no spiritual gatekeeping. There is no hierarchical restriction on truth. The unborn does not discriminate between traditions, cultures, or institutions. Wherever recognition arises, empowerment is complete. This does not trivialize practice. On the contrary, it demands far greater sincerity. Without ritual shortcuts, the practitioner must confront mind directly. Without ceremonial validation, realization must be stabilized through lived clarity. Without symbolic protection, responsibility becomes immediate. This is the hidden rigor of Unborn Mind Zen. It does not offer mystical spectacle, it offers uncompromising simplicity. When the four empowerments are seen through this lens, they are no longer distant attainments. They are already present as latent dimensions of recognition. As the unborn reveals itself, these dimensions unfold spontaneously, without ceremony, without authorization, without delay. This is not a rejection of Vajrayāna. It is its completion. Chapter 4: Dreams, Deities, and Visionary Empowerment. Among contemporary practitioners, few topics generate more fascination and more confusion than visionary empowerment. Dreams of deities, symbolic initiations, astral encounters, luminous beings granting blessings, inner transmissions received during meditation or altered states. All of these experiences are frequently interpreted as proof of spiritual advancement. Some are cherished as sacred confirmations. Others are treated as secret initiations beyond conventional lineage structures. Unborn Mind Zen approaches these phenomena with neither dismissal nor romanticization. Instead, it asks a far more penetrating question: who is the experiencer of these visions? When this question is examined carefully, the entire framework of visionary empowerment is transformed. In Unborn Mind teaching, dreams and visions do not originate from external divine authorities operating independently of consciousness. They arise from the intermediate realm of mind itself, the subtle imaginal dimension where form has not yet crystallized into physical embodiment, but has not dissolved into formless awareness either. This realm is known as the Manomayakaya, the mind-made body. The Manomayakaya is not a fantasy construct. It is the subtle vehicle through which consciousness experiences symbolic reality. It is the interface between waking perception and formless awareness. It is the architect of dream worlds, visionary landscapes, archetypal encounters, and post-death transitional states. In the novel, Voyage Through the Six Realms, this is portrayed not as metaphor, but as an experiential domain that the traveler must pass through in order to navigate the deeper strata of consciousness. Here lies the crucial point. The Manomayakaya is not the unborn. It is a gatekeeper, not a source. When practitioners receive empowerments in dreams or visions, what is actually occurring is interaction with the symbolic intelligence of the mind-made realm. This intelligence can produce extraordinary experiences. It can generate archetypal teachers, deities, protectors, and initiatory scenarios. It can transmit symbolic meaning, psychological integration, and even deep intuitive insight. But it does not confer ultimate realization. Why? Because the Manomayakaya still belongs to the domain of appearance. It is subtle appearance, luminous appearance, refined appearance, but appearance nonetheless. It arises within awareness. It is not awareness itself. This distinction is essential. Without it, practitioners easily mistake symbolic depth for awakening. They confuse visionary richness with liberation. They mistake the gatekeeper for the destination. In Unborn Mind Zen, dreams and visions are understood as skillful displays of mind, not ultimate transmissions of the unborn. They may arise spontaneously when the mind becomes quiet, when habitual identity loosens, or when karmic and archetypal patterns reorganize themselves. They may carry meaningful content. They may even catalyze spiritual maturation, but they do not replace direct recognition. The Manomayakaya can open doors. It cannot reveal the ground. This is why genuine awakening traditions consistently warn against fixation on visionary phenomena. The danger is subtle. Visions feel sacred. They carry emotional power. They often arrive during periods of vulnerability or intense practice. The ego, refined into spiritual identity, eagerly claims them as proof of advancement. Unborn Mind Zen counters this by returning again and again to the simplest question: does this experience dissolve self-centered identification or reinforce it? True empowerment reduces fixation. It does not decorate it. True transmission simplifies perception. It does not complicate it. True realization produces stability, humility, and natural compassion, not fascination with extraordinary states. When dreams and visions arise within unborn mind practice, they are treated as weather patterns passing through open sky. They are acknowledged without being grasped. Their symbolic content may be gently contemplated, but never absolutized. The practitioner is trained to recognize the underlying awareness rather than becoming absorbed in imaginal display. This is where the Manomayakaya fulfills its proper role. It is not the giver of empowerment. It is the threshold guardian. It tests whether awareness will become entangled in symbolic seduction or pass through into direct recognition. It presents dazzling forms not to grant authority, but to expose attachment. When fascination collapses, when symbolic hunger dissolves, when the practitioner no longer seeks validation from inner spectacle, the gate opens inward. Beyond the Manomayakaya lies not another realm. There is only the unborn. This is why Unborn Mind Zen does not encourage practitioners to pursue visionary empowerment. It encourages them to cultivate clarity sufficient to recognize visions as mind display and pass through them without attachment. When this capacity matures, dreams themselves begin to change. They become transparent. They lose compulsive narrative power. they no longer dominate attention. Instead, awareness remains present even within the dream state. At this stage, the Manomayakaya no longer functions as a barrier. It becomes a translucent medium through which recognition remains stable across waking and dreaming states alike. This is genuine integration. It is also why some practitioners report receiving self-empowerment during deep meditative or dream states. What they often encounter is not authorization granted by an external authority, but the temporary dissolution of ego boundaries. The experience feels expansive. Identity loosens. Awareness becomes vivid. This can feel profoundly liberating. But without stabilization, such experiences fade. The self quietly reconstitutes itself. The practitioner is left chasing repetition of the state rather than embodying its insight. Unborn Mind Zen therefore makes a crucial distinction between experience-based empowerment and realization-based empowerment. The former arises within the Manomayakaya, the latter transcends it. When realization stabilizes, dreams no longer function as special domains of transmission. They become continuous expressions of awareness. The boundary between waking and dreaming softens. Presence permeates both states. Empowerment is no longer episodic. It becomes continuous. This is the deeper meaning of dream yoga when understood through the unborn. Not control of dream imagery, not manipulation of inner symbols, but the stabilization of recognition across all experiential states. The true gatekeeper is not the deity in the dream. It is attachment itself. When attachment dissolves, the gate opens. And what is revealed is not another vision, but the unborn ground from which all visions arise. Chapter 5, Self-Empowerment, Illusion of Authority or Collapse of the Self. Few ideas generate more controversy in modern contemplative culture than the notion of self-empowerment. Some embrace it as spiritual autonomy, others reject it as ego inflation. Between these extremes lies a deeper truth that Unborn Mind Zen seeks to clarify. The confusion arises because the word self is rarely examined. If self-empowerment means that a personal identity grants itself spiritual authority, then it is nothing more than disguised self-delusion. The ego crowns itself king and calls the coronation awakening. This form of self-empowerment strengthens separation, reinforces spiritual narcissism, and replaces external hierarchy with internal fantasy. It is not liberation, it is refinement of bondage. Yet there is another meaning hidden beneath the surface. When Unborn Mind Zen speaks of empowerment arising without ritual, it does not mean that the personality authorizes itself. It means that the very structure of personal identity collapses. What remains is not a self-empowered, but the dissolution of the one who believed empowerment was needed. Here lies the central distinction. False self-empowerment is the self-claiming power. True self-empowerment is the self-disappearing. This reversal is subtle and easily misunderstood. Many practitioners experience moments of expanded awareness, ego softening, or non-dual perception, and interpret these experiences as personal attainment. The language of "I realized," "I awakened," or "I empowered myself" slips in quietly. Identity reasserts itself at a higher conceptual altitude. Unborn Mind Zen cuts through this pattern by asking a simple but devastating question. Who is the one claiming empowerment? When this question is examined directly, the answer dissolves. The self that seeks authorization cannot be located. What remains is awareness without owner, presence without center, clarity without possession. In this moment, empowerment ceases to be a claim and becomes a condition of being. This is why true empowerment never announces itself. It does not advertise. It does not seek recognition. It expresses itself silently through stability, humility, and natural responsiveness to suffering. When realization is genuine, there is no impulse to proclaim authority. The unborn does not need validation. This also explains why Unborn Mind Zen places such emphasis on post-recognition integration. Many practitioners mistake initial insight for completion. A moment of non-dual clarity is treated as final attainment. But without stabilization, the old patterns return. Identity quietly rebuilds itself around the memory of awakening. The practitioner becomes someone who had an experience, rather than someone who abides as the unborn. True empowerment reveals itself not in peak states, but in ordinary continuity. It shows itself in how one responds to irritation, fear, attachment, and desire. It manifests in patience without suppression, compassion without strategy, and clarity without effort. This is where Unborn Mind Zen departs sharply from performative spirituality. There is no emphasis on spiritual identity, teacher, persona, or symbolic authority. The empowered mind does not present itself as special. It does not seek followers. It does not cultivate mystique. It functions quietly, naturally, and without self-reference. Another misunderstanding arises when practitioners attempt to bypass the discipline of realization by invoking direct empowerment. They claim spontaneous authorization without having stabilized recognition. This is not liberation. It is avoidance. It replaces disciplined inquiry with conceptual shortcuts. It mistakes philosophical agreement with experiential transformation. Unborn Mind Zen does not permit this shortcut. Recognition must be lived, not declared. Empowerment must be embodied, not asserted. This is why the collapse of the self is not dramatic. It is not theatrical. It is not accompanied by cosmic fireworks. It occurs through sustained seeing. It unfolds through repeated recognition of awareness as unborn, empty, and luminous. Over time, the sense of a separate doer weakens, the grip of identity loosens, the need for validation dissolves. At this stage, empowerment ceases to be a concept altogether. It is no longer something one thinks about. It becomes the natural condition of living without psychological bondage. In this sense, Unborn Mind Zen reframes self-empowerment as the ultimate paradox. Nothing empowers you. Nothing authorizes you. Nothing initiates you. And yet awakening occurs. Not because something is added, but because something false is removed. This is why the unborn is called unborn. It is not created. It is not produced. It is not achieved. It reveals itself when the illusion of becoming collapses. Here, the practitioner no longer stands outside reality attempting to improve it. They rest as reality itself. Action arises spontaneously. Compassion flows without strategy. Wisdom expresses itself without calculation. This is not personal empowerment. It is the empowerment of no self. This is the highest transmission Unborn Mind Zen recognizes, not a ritual initiation, not a visionary seal, not a symbolic coronation, but the irreversible collapse of the identity that sought empowerment in the first place. When this collapse stabilizes, there is nothing left to empower. Only the unborn remains. Chapter 6: Living Empowerment: How the Unborn Expresses Itself in Daily Life. If empowerment remains confined to philosophy, meditation cushions, visionary experience, or conceptual understanding, it has not yet fulfilled its purpose. True empowerment does not terminate in insight. It expresses itself through life. The unborn does not remain hidden in contemplative stillness. It moves, speaks, listens, works, and loves through the human form. This is the final measure of realization. Unborn Mind Zen therefore places its greatest emphasis not on mystical attainment, but on lived clarity. Awakening is not demonstrated by how one speaks about the unborn, but by how one responds to conflict, suffering, attachment, and ordinary responsibility. It reveals itself not through elevated language, but through simplicity, patience, and unforced presence. When the unborn stabilizes, something subtle but profound occurs. The sense of a central controller weakens. Life begins to unfold with less friction. Action arises without excessive deliberation. There is responsiveness rather than reaction. Circumstances are met directly, without the heavy overlay of personal narrative. This does not produce passivity. On the contrary, it produces precision. When the self-centered filter relaxes, perception becomes clearer, listening becomes deeper, movement becomes more appropriate. Compassion emerges not as moral obligation, but as natural resonance with suffering. Living empowerment is therefore not dramatic. It is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not seek recognition. It is visible in the smallest details: how one listens without interrupting, how one refrains from unnecessary harm, how one responds to frustration without contraction, how one allows silence to speak. This is why Unborn Mind Zen consistently warns against spiritual performance. When realization is genuine, there is no urge to display it. The unborn does not perform holiness. It expresses ordinary sanity. It returns the practitioner to a state of naturalness that precedes spiritual ambition. Another hallmark of living empowerment is the absence of rigid identity. When the unborn is stabilized, the practitioner no longer clings to being a spiritual person. Roles become functional rather than defining. Teacher, student, parent, worker, artist, hermit, these are worn lightly. They are tools, not identities. When they are no longer needed, they dissolve without conflict. This flexibility is not indecision, it is freedom from fixation. It allows the practitioner to respond appropriately to changing circumstances without being bound to self-image. Living empowerment also expresses itself through emotional transparency. Emotions still arise, but they no longer dominate perception. Anger, sadness, joy, and fear are experienced fully without being suppressed or indulged. They move through awareness like weather passing through open sky. There is no need to build identity around them. This is one of the clearest signs of stabilized recognition. The practitioner is no longer enslaved by inner states. They are present with them without being possessed by them. Another dimension of living empowerment is ethical clarity. This does not arise from imposed rules. It arises naturally when separation dissolves. When the boundary between self and other weakens, harming another feels indistinguishable from harming oneself. Compassion becomes intuitive rather than moralistic. Integrity becomes effortless rather than enforced. This does not create perfection. It creates sincerity. Mistakes still occur. Limitations still exist. But there is a willingness to see clearly, to correct gently, and to respond without defensiveness. Perhaps the most important expression of living empowerment is humility. When the unborn is recognized, there is no personal accomplishment to defend. There is nothing to protect. There is no pedestal to maintain. The practitioner does not stand above others, they stand with them. This humility is not self-effacement. It is the natural consequence of seeing that there is no separate self to elevate. Living empowerment also transforms the relationship to death. When awareness recognizes its unborn nature, death is no longer experienced as annihilation. While the body will pass and the personality will dissolve, the ground of awareness remains untouched. This does not eliminate grief, it dissolves existential terror. Life is lived more fully when death is no longer treated as an enemy. In daily life, this manifests as a deep appreciation for impermanence. Moments are not taken for granted, encounters are met with presence. Time is no longer treated as something to be escaped, but as the living field in which the unborn expresses itself. Ultimately, living empowerment is the return to simplicity. No special posture is required. No spiritual costume is needed. No sacred environment is necessary. The unborn expresses itself through washing dishes, walking down the street, listening to a friend, sitting in silence, working, resting, and breathing. This is the great secret of Unborn Mind Zen. There is no final ceremony. There is no ultimate ritual. There is only the continuous unfolding of awareness recognizing itself in every moment. When this recognition stabilizes, empowerment ceases to be a concept, a practice, or a goal. It becomes life itself. Chapter 7, The Great Empowerment, Returning to What Was Never Absent. At the end of all teaching, something simple remains. Not a method, not a ritual, not a philosophy, not a lineage credential, only the unborn itself. Throughout this series, we have examined empowerment from many angles: ritual transmission, lineage authority, visionary experience, self-empowerment claims, and daily embodiment. Yet none of these were presented as final answers. They were stepping stones, not destinations. Each inquiry pointed beyond form, beyond symbol, beyond conceptual scaffolding, back toward the silent ground from which all empowerment arises. Now the circle closes. What has become clear is not that empowerment must be reinvented, but that it was misunderstood from the beginning. Empowerment was never meant to be something added to awareness. It was never intended as spiritual currency or hierarchical validation. Its true function has always been recognition, the direct unveiling of what has never been absent. This is the great empowerment. It does not arrive with ceremony. It does not depend on permission. It does not require symbolic sealing. It occurs the moment awareness recognizes itself as unborn. At this point, the entire spiritual economy collapses. Seeking loses its urgency, accumulation loses its meaning, comparison loses its power. The practitioner is no longer oriented toward becoming something else. They rest as what already is. This does not produce withdrawal from life. It produces deeper participation. When the illusion of separation dissolves, engagement becomes more intimate, not less. Work becomes service. Listening becomes presence. Movement becomes expression. Silence becomes communication. The unborn does not isolate. It integrates. One of the quiet truths revealed by this series is that empowerment has always been closer than breath. It has never been hidden behind distant lineages or exotic rituals. It has always been waiting in the simplest act of awareness, recognizing itself. Yet simplicity is often overlooked because the mind seeks complexity. It seeks spectacle. It seeks confirmation. It seeks dramatic transformation. The unborn offers none of this. It offers something far more radical: ordinary sanity. This is why genuine realization often appears unimpressive to the ego. There is no costume change, no spiritual identity upgrade, no mystical persona, just the gradual falling away of unnecessary tension, fixation, and self-concern. The practitioner becomes quieter not externally but internally. The constant commentary softens, the compulsive narrative weakens, space opens around experience. Within that space, compassion arises naturally. Wisdom expresses itself without effort. Life flows with less resistance. This is the fruit of empowerment without ritual. Not transcendence of the world, but intimacy with it. Not escape from form, but freedom within form. Not spiritual superiority, but shared humanity. Perhaps the most important realization that emerges at the end of this journey is that there is nothing left to chase. The horizon collapses into the present moment. The path folds back into where one is standing. The seeker dissolves into the seeing itself. Here, the unborn is no longer treated as an abstract principle. It is lived as direct experience. It becomes the silent background of thought, the openness within emotion, the stillness beneath movement. Nothing special needs to be done. Nothing mystical needs to be added. Nothing dramatic needs to occur. Simply remain present. Simply allow awareness to recognize itself. Simply stop turning away. This is the final instruction of Unborn Mind Zen. There is no final initiation ceremony. There is no closing ritual. There is no ultimate seal. The unborn seals itself. And when this recognition stabilizes, empowerment is no longer a topic to discuss. It is the natural condition of being alive. This concludes the series, but it does not conclude the practice. It does not conclude the inquiry. It does not conclude the unfolding. It simply returns you gently and unmistakably to what has always been here. Svasti. Empowerment Without Ritual Series Overview. Transmission in Unborn Mind Zen. This series was born not from abstract theory, but from a living question arising within the Unborn Mind Zen community. A sincere inquiry from UMZ member Scott opened a doorway into one of the most misunderstood subjects in contemporary spirituality: empowerment. Across traditions, empowerment has often been treated as something granted, bestowed by ceremony, authorized by lineage, sealed through ritual transmission. Yet Unborn Mind Zen approaches this question from an entirely different direction. It asks not how empowerment is given, but what empowerment actually is. From the very beginning, this series has pointed to a simple yet radical truth. Empowerment is not conferred, it is recognized. What is recognized is not an attainment, not a spiritual status, not a new identity, but the unborn nature of awareness itself. What this series explores. Throughout these chapters, we have examined empowerment from multiple perspectives, gradually stripping away symbolic overlays to reveal its experiential core. We began by redefining empowerment itself, exposing the difference between ritual authorization and direct recognition. We then explored lineage without ceremony, showing how transmission in Unborn Mind Zen is preserved not through institutional continuity, but through living realization. From there, we revisited the Vajrayāna four empowerments and reinterpreted them through the lens of unborn mind recognition, revealing them not as ritual milestones, but as descriptions of natural stages of awakening. We then turned toward dreams, visions, and deity encounters, clarifying the role of the Manomayakaya as the symbolic gatekeeper of inner experience. and distinguishing skillful mind display from ultimate realization. The series continued by addressing the controversial idea of self-empowerment, exposing the difference between ego authorization and the collapse of the self that occurs through genuine awakening. Finally, we grounded everything in daily life, demonstrating that true empowerment expresses itself not in mystical performance, but in ordinary conduct, emotional clarity, compassion, humility, and presence. The series concluded by returning the reader to the unborn itself, not as a philosophical concept, but as lived reality. What makes Unborn Mind Zen different? Unborn Mind Zen does not compete with Vajrayāna, Dzogchen, or esoteric traditions. It completes them by pointing directly to their shared source. Where ritual traditions emphasize transmission through form, Unborn Mind Zen emphasizes transmission through recognition. Where hierarchical systems emphasize authorization, Unborn Mind Zen emphasizes experiential sovereignty. Where symbolic systems emphasize ceremony, Unborn Mind Zen emphasizes simplicity. This does not mean discipline is absent. On the contrary, Unborn Mind Zen demands the most rigorous discipline of all: honest self-inquiry, sustained recognition, and embodied integration. There is no shortcut through spectacle. There is only the quiet courage to look directly at awareness itself. Editorial note to our readers. Dear friends of the unborn, this series was written not to create belief, but to dissolve confusion. Many sincere practitioners today find themselves navigating multiple traditions, mixed transmissions, visionary experiences, ritual empowerments, and modern spiritual movements. It is easy to become disoriented. It is easy to mistake symbolism for realization. It is easy to confuse experience with awakening. The purpose of this series has been to gently but firmly bring the compass back to its true north: direct recognition of the unborn mind. Nothing more is required. Nothing less will suffice. If these writings have stirred insight, let that insight mature quietly. Do not rush to conclusions. Do not convert recognition into identity. Allow awareness to stabilize naturally. Let simplicity replace striving. Let clarity replace performance. Remember that Unborn Mind Zen is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about becoming honest. It is not about ascending into spiritual fantasy. It is about resting in what has always been present. If this series has served you, then it has already fulfilled its purpose, not by giving you something new, but by helping you see what was never absent. With gratitude to Scott for initiating this inquiry, and to all who walk this path of direct recognition with sincerity and humility, we close this series not with finality, but with quiet continuation. The teaching does not end here. It simply returns home. Svasti.